Hey everybody, it's Ryan Metzler here again, and today we're going to take a look at a small little card game. That card game is one that's been out for quite some time. It's by the designer of Agricola and Le Havre, and At the Gates of Loyang. We're going to take a look at Bohnanza. Now, this is a game that I reviewed a really long time ago, back when I was doing written reviews, but I never brought it to the video review format, so I figured I'd revisit it and take a look at it here. The game is going to play small to a large number of players, although I don't suggest playing with anything less than 3 because the 2-player variant is terrible. Let's get that out of the way right there. But the idea of this game is that you're going to be a farmer who is planting and trying to trade, and then of course reaping or harvesting and selling beans in order to get points. And the points are actually going to be both the bean cards will be beans, and on the opposite side they will be points. So you're going to try and have the most money over the course of the game by being a clever trader and keeping your cards in a way that you can play them, which is going to be difficult because you're not allowed to reorganize, but we'll get into that shortly. So real quick, why don't we just take a look at this game, we'll see how it plays, and then at the end we'll come back here and we'll get my opinions on Bohnanza. So here you can see a game of Bohnanza set up for 4 players. Now, to set up for 4 players, you actually remove a whole set of beans. You remove all of the coffee beans from the deck. So my deck right now does not have coffee beans in it. With fewer players, you remove different beans. With more players, you remove different beans. It all depends on the number of players, but your deck will be set up differently. Now I'm going to use the coffee beans as an example to show a card. Each card in this game will have a title, which will be a type of bean, in this case coffee bean, a number on it, 24, which is how many of them there are in the deck, so you can kind of keep track of how many have been played. And then at the bottom there's going to be a progression. You'll see down here it has the number 4 and a coin, 7 and 2 coins, 10 and 3 coins, and 12 and 4 coins. This is how much money you're going to get for harvesting the number of coins at the bottom. So if I were to harvest 4 coffee beans, I would get 1 coin. 7 would give me 2, 10 would get me 3, and 12 would get me 4. And anything more than that, of course. Now when you harvest these, you're going to take the ones that you don't get. So for example, if I had 4, I would discard 3 of them to the discard pile and keep the last one flipped over as a coin, removing 1 coffee from the deck. Now, our game doesn't have coffee, but each of our players is going to start the game with a hand of cards. We'll see that there are going to be different types of beans: stink beans, wax beans, cocoa beans, and black beans. Now, I have a hand of cards and I'm not allowed to arrange it. Whatever order they get dealt in is the order they must stay in. So I can't ever take this stink bean and remove it and move it around. So if players have a problem with fiddling with their cards, I'm looking at you, Magic players, you can't do that. You have to leave them in order. So our stink bean will be in front until it goes away somehow, and these wax beans will be in order, and the cocoa bean and the black-eyed bean. We're going to keep those all in order, and each player will have their own hand of cards that they're looking at. The first thing you will do on your turn is you must plant your first bean, and each player has 2 imaginary fields in front of them. At some point in the game, they can buy a third one if they like by spending 3 coins, and they will have 3 fields that they can plant into. But the first thing you must do is plant your first bean, so I will have to plant this stink bean in one of my 2 imaginary fields. The next thing I can do is I may plant my next bean. So if I want, I can plant this wax bean, and since I have another one coming up, I'm going to do so. So I'm going to plant this here, and I have a stink bean in one of my field and a wax bean in the other. At this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip 2 cards from the top of the deck, and every player will do these same things on their turn. And I flipped over 2 garden beans. Now, this brings up a dilemma. I would like to trade these garden beans, or maybe I want to keep them. But that's my option. I can either trade these away, or I can keep them, or I can trade one and keep the other, whatever the case might be. What I'm going to have to do is try and get beans that I would like, stink beans and wax beans, from other players in kind of conjunction for these garden beans. But garden beans are really good. There's only 6 of them in the deck, and 2 of them will pay out 2 money, 3 will pay out 3 money. That's far better than the payout on most other beans. So perhaps I decide to keep them all for myself. If I do this, I'm going to have to plant them after the trading phase is done. And I would have to get rid of one of my piles of beans because I only have 2 fields and the beans are already planted in them. Each field can only take 1 type of bean, so I can't put garden beans in a stink bean field or in a wax bean field. So I would have to discard one of them, and I get to choose which one. Usually you can't sell off beans that only have 1 bean in the field, but since both of my fields only have 1 bean, I'm allowed to do so. Now, in addition to trading the 2 cards that I flipped up or keeping them, I'm allowed to trade anything from my hand that I would like. But I have a wax bean, which I'm going to want to keep to plant with my other wax bean, a cocoa bean, which is super rare. As a matter of fact, it's the rarest card in the deck. There's only 4 of them, and they pay out pretty well. And a black-eyed bean that I don't necessarily want and may be willing to trade away. So I could say that I'm willing to trade a black-eyed bean to somebody who happens to have, let's say, for example, a wax bean. So what I would do is I would look, and each other player would, of course, address their hand hand when I said that and see if they had a black-eyed bean or a wax bean that they'd like to trade away. Perhaps this player is not particularly interested in the wax bean and would like to trade it. So they decide that they would trade their wax bean away, taking it out of their hand but keeping everything else in order, for my black-eyed bean that I would take out of my hand and keep everything else in order. And these would go to our corresponding areas. So I would get the wax bean and he would get the black-eyed bean. Once all trading is done, and players may only trade with the active player, they may make whatever trades they like. The active player can even donate cards, give them away to a player if they want to get them out of their hand. This will be important because you'll note they'll have to plant the first card in their hand on their next turn. Maybe they don't want it. I just happen to want mine. So once all trading is done, you must plant everything that you have in your areas. So for example, I could discard my stink bean because I only have one in each of my fields to the discard pile. That's basically harvesting it for nothing, and I can plant both of my garden beans and my wax bean in the wax bean field. At any point you want, you can actually harvest. So right now, if I wanted to, I could harvest my 2 garden beans for 2 money. I would take both of these, flip them over, and I would have 2 money in the game that I could either use for victory points towards the end or to buy a 3rd bean field later on. I could also harvest my wax beans, but doing so, I do not have 4, would give me nothing. I would just discard them and have an open field. This player, who also traded for the black-eyed bean, would then have to plant it in his field. So all traded cards get planted. They never go into somebody else's hand. The stink bean is now in the discard discard pile, I should say, and that basically ends trading. To end my turn, I would then draw 3 cards from the pile and add them to my hand, always making sure that I keep the order of my hand consistent, placing new cards on the back. These are going to be cards that I can either plant or trade later, and hopefully get some more beans from my own piles in order to get more points throughout the game. At this point, I would then pass the turn to the next player, who would then have to plant his first card and may plant his second, but wouldn't be a good idea to do so until he hopefully gets another black-eyed bean later. He would then flip the top 2 cards of the pile, which he may trade, along with trading any cards from his hand, and then all traded cards would be planted again. We're going to do this until this deck is exhausted 3 times. Harvesting, well, exhausted once, then reshuffled, made a new deck, exhausted again, shuffled a 3rd time, and after that the game is going to end. Harvesting any fields that you should harvest in order to get points for the end of the game. At the end of the game, whoever has best managed to plant their beans, trade for beans with other players, harvest them in order to get coins, and has the most coins will be the winner. And there you have it. That is Bohnanza, and I would go so far as to call this one a classic card game, one that I think most people who are gamers should have in their collection simply because of the ease of play and the depth of play and the fact that it's just a well-made, well-designed, and easy to get to the table game. Now, the game does scale, as I said, very well from 3 to 7, I would say. And the more players you have, I think, the better, although 7 may be too many. You definitely don't want to go to 2, but I think between 3 and 6, maybe even 3 to 7, you're going to have a satisfying game that's fun to play. The deck does remove cards based on those numbers of players, so it will scale actually, it's built in to scale into the game, and the game is all about, well, first, having the best cards. There's in any card game the element of drawing the right cards, and since you can't reorganize your cards and you can't really do anything with them except for trade them away, it's all about managing how those cards are in your hand. You can get them out of your hand by trading them if you're willing to donate them to players who may get points for them, or if you're willing or able to kind of craft some type of good trade for them. People don't know what's coming up in your hand, only you know that, and they don't know that maybe you have, a bunch of blue beans or navy beans in your hand, and you're willing to trade for one and maybe give them something a little bit better because of what you have coming up. So it's all about that timing, the ability to rearrange, well, not rearrange, but reorganize by getting rid of things, not reorganizing them in hand, but getting rid of things and shortening your hand in order to have things come up when you want them to. Very good game, very interesting. I know it's kind of hard to describe reorganizing without reorganizing, but I think you get the idea from the gameplay. Great game, one I definitely suggest you try out. Plays a great range of people and very fun. Check that one out. It's Bohnanza from Uwe Rosenberg.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.